次有焦点的事，我们不见不散。
Maybe the first question is why so-called third plenum is so important. Basically, I think there is historical myth. In 1978, December of 1978, there was third plenum of the 11th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, which was claimed to start post-war reform years. So I call it myth. Basically, that plenum completed power change from Mao's successor Hua Guofeng to Deng Xiaoping, as all you know. So they didn't even mention reform, very tiny, very marginally. In very marginal sentence, reform appeared only once in the actually communique of that plan. Anyway, from then on, so particularly in the Xi Jinping, era, Xi Jinping also started his policy announcement from a third plenum of the 18th Central Committee that was taking place in 2013. So Xi Jinping today claimed that, okay, so in 1978, reform started, and in 23, reform getting deepening, actually deepened. Today, he also claims this third plenum, try to deepen reform and advance Chinese modernization. Because, beside of this actually historical significance, I think there is also periodicity. Okay, so a kind of reason, of political reason. So usually when the new Central Committee was set up, the first plenum is always about, so-called elections of the Politburo and the just the Politburo and a central military commission, those top leadership bodies. So composition of them immediately following a party congress. Then the second plenum is usually about NPC, PCC, so-called two sessions, personnel arrangement, policy reports, things like that. Then when the new Central Committee for the first time has actively chance to discuss substantial policy issues, they came to the third plenum. So also something like US politics midterm election. So after 1.5 or even 2 years or even more than 2 years, so the third plenum, when it takes place, that means the party congress already passed for a time, actually. So the new Central Committee needs to actively adjust its policy, not only announce new policy, but something not so, closely, intimately following the party congress. And delayed, it seems that this actually third plenum was delayed because, as we mentioned, 11 years ago, okay, there was third plenum of 18th party Central Committee. And 6 years ago, there was a third plenum of 19th Central Committee. So why not exactly within 5 years? So I guess, that pattern of usually, so every 5 years you have the third plenum of a new Central Committee, but so why this time 6 years? Before the plenum, we knew that there were different interpretations or speculations. One prevailing argument was that Xi Jinping was actually meeting resistance from party elites regarding China's, governance, especially economic policies. From actually the outcome of this plenum, maybe, I think there were resistances, but not so powerful enough to block Xi Jinping to implement his agenda, to implement his actually decision-making willingness. So basically, I would say there could be another interpretation which is Xi Jinping intentionally postponed actually this plan. So because the new pattern was not so new, actually, it's not so new. Yeah, it started in 13th Party Congress. Okay, from the 13th Party Congress in 1987, they started this pattern. And the 13th Party Congress was known as, okay, reform milestone. So Xi Jinping, I guess, he doesn't want to see this kind of a pattern. So in the future, I can predict if he still like to postpone some, significant meetings, still want to change this kind of a pattern shaped in past several decades, that would not be surprised, I guess. Then very quickly for personnel changes, you know that personnel issues are the least transparent issues in Chinese politics. So this time we have very tiny window. We can see actually something as announced by the Central Committee's, communique. So basically, we know about Qin Gang, still Comrade Qin Gang actually. He resigned, so the Central Committee accepted his resignation and he would be downgraded as cadre. But anyway, so still, we don't know what really happened with Qin Gang. So why this outcome actually, after long time investigation, at least from summer of the last year. And what I like to bring your attention to is actually there are at least 4 indicators indicating that political purge within the military is much larger than we might have known, and maybe much serious. So first, all 3 Central Committee members, including 1 alternate members, were expelled from the Communist Party. They were former PLA generals, high-ranking generals. Okay, that's indicator 1. Second, so 1 person, Sun Jinming, alternative member, and he, for the first time, at least to me, I heard that this guy was also involved into purge, corruption, whatever. Yeah, he was purged anyway. So that means that there were still a lot of persons we don't know who were already, under investigation, who could be purged actually at a later stage. The third indicator is new Central Committee members. They added 3 alternative members into full members. But actually, if they follow the rules, they follow the procedure to do this. But if they strictly follow the procedure, so person ranked as number 2 in order of ballot they gained at the party congress. The second guy would be Ding Xingnu, also deputy vice commander of a rocket force of PLA. But he was actually overescaped. So he was not able to get this opportunity. So he might be also involved into corruption, and he could be purged. Tomorrow, we don't know. And also the fourth one. So Rocket Force Commissar Xu Zhongbo, there were actually reports about his purge, but he was not expelled from the Central Committee this time. But that doesn't mean he is safe, because another guy who is former Minister of Agriculture, he Tang Renjian, he actually publicly we know that he is under investigation, but he's still kept within the Central Committee. So that means investigation still continue. So conclusions are not yet made. So maybe Xu Zhongbo can be this kind of case. So anyway, so all those things means, it seems that rocket forces are really problematic within the PLA. And within PLA, there is a very big purge going on right now. And for the general tone of the third plenum, I would go very briefly. Okay, so you know that we have two experts. They will do much better job than I do explaining what the policies mean. So basically, I just want to remind everybody. So there are two key words according to official Chinese sources regarding this plan. So reform and Chinese modernization. I would say even Xi Jinping emphasized that, okay, through this plan, we would like to send very strong signal to Chinese people and the international society that we will have reform. We will continue reform. We will depend reform. But I would say if we regard reform as the single keyword, that would be wrong. I would say the real keyword is Chinese modernization. Chinese modernization is the official translation of 中国式现代化. But in my, understanding of Chinese language, 中国式现代化 doesn't simply mean Chinese modernization. That could be 中国的现代化, right? So of course, modernization in China is always Chinese modernization. And so they emphasize Chinese style modernization, modernization in the Chinese way, modernization in Chinese standard. Anyway, so with Chinese characteristics, so usually, it's really joke. It seems that China becomes negative actually word. When you use China to modify something, that means so the thing is being modified would be changed by nature. So 40-something years later, years earlier. So sorry, my bad. I got too early. Got about too early. So in 1978, following that, they created a term so-called socialism with Chinese characteristics. That means their socialism is not authentic socialism. So today, when they call their modernization a Chinese style modernization, that means, okay, their modernization is not really modernization we understand. So also similarly, Xi Jinping's reform is not reform we understand in conventional way, and also not reform which took place following the death of Mao Zedong. So basically, the resolution, reads like actually government report to the NPC. So covering everything, they call it comprehensively. It's really comprehensive, but if we look at history, when the authority really try to reform, they point usually at one thing, because reform is not easy. Xi Jinping also said, so those easy reform they have done. So now they need to do really reform in those difficult issue areas. So if you want to do this kind of reform in truly difficult issue areas, you don't want to do everything at the same time. You want to do reform with actually very, very important, importance. Anyway, I will stop here and we'll listen to my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Guoguang, for helping decode some of that arcane language that runs through this 20,000 odd character decision that was published on Sunday. To delve into some of the economic and fiscal policies that were contained in that decision, over to you, Bert.
All right, thanks, Neil. And it's actually a resolution. I don't know why, but the official translation of the same word is now resolution instead of decisions. So I'll try to stick to resolution. Look, overall, this is quite a package. The good thing, one of the good things is that it's actually there. There was a debate actually whether this was going to happen or not, this third plan, and whether people felt that it was needed, the leadership felt, and there was debate within the leadership on where to go. Now it's there. And of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as we know from the third plenum of 2013. But at least we have a pudding, and we can look at it, and some may like the taste, others may not like the taste. Quite impressive, 300 measures, very comparable to 2013. I think that is very deliberate as well. But by and large, still a focus on the supply side. Yes, there's demand-side policies. I'm going to talk about it, but the mainstay is still supply side, and it is about high-quality development, the high-standard socialist market economy as being the tool for this Chinese modernization. Of course, the new quality productive forces. It's one of the favorite of Xi Jinping since last September. And a clear statement that manufacturing is going to be the mainstay of Chinese development. It needs to have a reasonable scale. On the demand side, there is far less. There is encouragement of domestic demand, but frankly, the number of paragraphs devoted to that is not that large, with the exception of fiscal. Almost absent, it's not completely absent, but almost absent is common prosperity. Now, that used to be if you want, the flag, the banner, or the bogeyman, depending on which side you look at, of a much more leftist type of sentiment that emerged in China a couple of years ago. I think it's deliberately sort of left out, toned down. It's wrapped into balancing urban and rural development, so much less prominent than before. There's a lot of, instead though, there's a lot of measures announced on people's welfare. It's on the social welfare system, on the pension system, on the housing system. A really positive, as far as I can see, on the hukou system and the land management system, which is very much related to that. So there is more liberalization of hukou. There's the right of people to get services in the city that they reside in, and now endorsed by the Central Committee. So that's more important than before. And the management of land is such that you can actually take your land to the city, because we're now at a stage of migration that a lot of said, well, actually, I don't want to have this urban hukou because I would use my land rights back home. That's very explicit that they're going to keep it. I think is a very important factor in all of this. On the supply side, and I know Lizzie's going to talk a lot about technology, so I won't take away her thunder, but to me, it's a very consistent policy. It's also a policy of doubling down on science and technology, down on industrial policy, linking the two, having all kinds of tools that would link the two. And so basically it is not just of today's technology, but future technology, the high quality productive forces. That's in summary on the technology side. Of course, mean that there would be more objection from abroad against an industrial policy of China. I think it's one of the contestable areas, and China would need to see how they can balance that. Finally, and you promised the fiscal reforms. Well, I've been talking about fiscal reforms for probably 25 years, so I was actually quite pleased with what is in the document, in the resolution overall. First of all, there's a clear recognition that there's a fiscal problem, that there's a local fiscal problem because of the real estate sector, etc. And there is promise of tax reforms, there's promise of transfer reforms, there's a centralization of expenditures, there will be a better budget management, and the management, China's fiscal policy has 4 fiscal policies, basically, 4 different sets in the budget, very confusing. I hope there will be some reforms to clean that up. The fifth is the debt management, where clearly China's got itself into a bind with the real estate expansion, with lots of infrastructure investment, and now a slowdown, so local governments can no longer pay their debt. More resolution on that. I find that a pretty good package. Again, it will be Chinese modernization. It will not be Germany or the United States or anywhere else. Especially outsiders may not like everything, but at least it creates some clarity. It creates some policy corridors for people to look at. Finally, and that is maybe the most important one, is that there's a confirmation of this great line of 2013, the decisive force of the market. The market is the decisive force in the allocation of resources. So the state market balance. I actually believe that it's a bit stronger even in 2013. It was not in the communique, but in the resolution it was, and it repeats that line, and then it says we should leverage the role of the market. And if I read it correctly, we should also focus state enterprises on their core mission, which is not everything. Because one of the problems in today's China is that state enterprises have been expanding and basically pushing out the private sector, which is bad for innovation, which is bad for productivity, the stuff that China needs. Let me stop here and get back to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Bert. Yeah, a lot there that we can unpack in a bit more detail in the discussion. But thanks for that excellent overview of the main economic pillars of the plenum decision. So to go into more detail about this huge pillar of technology and some of the international dimensions of that, Lizzie, over to you.
Neil, thank you. Let me just take the next 5 to 7 minutes to share my 2 cents on the third plenum's key tech policy announcements and discuss the implications for international relations. So I want to start things off with China's big economic goal. The overarching aim, as the previous panelists alluded to, is to achieve Chinese-style modernization. And there's actually a deadline for it. It's 2035, which means doubling of per capita income to about $25,000. So to hit that target, what that means is China needs to grow at about 4.5 to 5% annually. And right now, the data is at 4.7%, but projections usually suggest that it might dip below 4% next year on. And that really underscores how crucial it is for China to keep the economic engine running. And it's clear to me from the third plenum document that the Chinese leadership has decided that to sustain this level of growth, China needs systemic upgrading along the global value chain, not just short-term stimuli. And if you read the document, there's this massive emphasis on technology innovation and the so-called new quality productive forces. In fact, the tech-related terms are mentioned 160 times compared with property and housing, which only gets 4 mentions throughout the resolution. And for the tech and innovation policies, there are 2 central themes that really stand out to me. A, self-sufficiency, and B, major breakthroughs, especially in frontier science. I mean, that's no surprise given the rising geopolitical tensions, particularly with the US. What's really interesting is the plenum also emphasizes this dual role of state guidance and intense competition among private sector companies and entrepreneurs. And the state will continue to play a crucial role in creating and supporting especially industry supply chains and providing sort of guidance on what's a priority. But the private sector is recognized as the primary driver of growth and innovation. So China has adopted this approach and seen success in its EV sectors and battery sectors. It seems like the leadership is determined to apply that formula to other priority sectors, including semiconductors, medical equipment, and machine tools. It seems that another thing that really stand out in the third plenum document is, whether it's investment technology, infrastructure, green energy transitions, or digital upgrades in manufacturing, those initiatives are not just about boosting productivity and fostering innovation, which Beijing sees as essential for its long-term economic growth. They are also aimed at tackling a huge swath of other problems like demographic challenges, right? So the document mentions using tech solutions to address the shortfall in healthcare funding and pension funds. So basically, tech is viewed as the solution to unemployment, to lack of domestic demand. I mean, these are typically seen as classic demand-side issues, but Beijing basically sees tech as a magic potion for all those problems. Another noteworthy point is that the plenum also introduced new initiatives to restructure the country's financial system and STEM education system surrounding tech, such as encouraging and regulating angel investment and venture capital, and measures to be more open to foreign investment to support China's indigenous tech innovation. Another key point from the plenum is increased investment to support so-called high-risk, high-value basic research. From what I hear on the ground, universities in China are getting more autonomy these days to manage their scientific achievements. The idea is it's beneficial for China to foster an environment ripe for innovation and especially commercialization. We've been hearing a lot of talking about bridging the Death Valley curve, referring to the phase from lab work to pilot testing and mass production, where many entrepreneurs face a lot of uncertainties. And Chinese universities like Shanghai Jiaotong, Tsinghua, Zhejiang, and Tongji have set up investment funds to support on-campus entrepreneurship. Now, the goal is to connect scientists and scientist research with private capital. And these days, the buzzword we usually hear from China is patient capital. The idea is that to transform technological achievements to commercialization requires long-term, consistent capital injections backed by government support, as private funds typically prefer more mature technologies that yield more certain outcome. So we can dive into the specifics if the audience is more interested, but let's just be real about what those initiatives can achieve versus not. According to Bloomberg economic forecast, high-tech sectors in China are expected to grow to 19% of GDP by 2026, and that's up from 11% in 2018. And if we include things like EVs, batteries, and solar panels, this number could swell to about 23%. And that's sufficient to offset the shrinking real estate sector. But that's sort of the optimistic scenario. And there are a host of challenges with those initiatives, right? We see China is still reluctant to resort to traditional stimuli to support consumers and households directly. And that has definitely made the recovery much bumpier and much more uncertain. The reality is many households are still feeling the pinch, especially as their wealth is already shrinking due to property market problems. And this focus on technologies could also widen income inequality. I know common prosperity is not featured prominently in the document, but it's still one of the key tenets of Xi Jinping's economic philosophy, if you can call it that. And if we see experiences in other developed economies, high-paying tech jobs are not evenly distributed, and sometimes that can lead to further socioeconomic disparities. And I think another really risky aspect is trade tensions, especially when it comes to international trade with developed countries. The focus on high-tech industries, China's manufacturing prowess has certainly ramped up trade tensions with the US and EU, and that has raised global concerns. On the bright side, it seems pretty clear to me that the plenum documents hint at how leaderships plan to respond to those trade tensions and tariffs. There's definitely an emphasis on China adapting by relocating supply chains to emerging markets and shifting the economy towards domestic consumption. So that's a potential strategy. And we know when it comes to trade, China has a lot of negotiating power here, right? For sectors like energy, China is a major importer, US is a major exporter, so there's room for negotiation on that front. And on the financial side, China has been offloading US Treasury bonds. There's potential bargaining power on China's side too. And I think an interesting wrinkle is a potential change in attitudes in US leadership's trade stance. We know former President Trump is very concerned with bilateral deficit, but he seems to support Chinese companies establishing factories in the US, right? And that could redirect investment away from regions like Southeast Asia and Mexico, potentially altering the global investment landscape we've seen in the past few years. So there is a lot of room and fluidity there. One really interesting aspect of the plenum, as I see it, is how China sees international trade, tech upgrade, industrial policies, and international standard setting as an integrated piece. There's a section in the document on green transition. There's a long list of objectives on carbon governance. I mean, these measures are definitely meant to ensure that China's carbon governance meets international standards, perhaps paving the way for China to continue to export to key markets like the EU, which is still crucial to China's development. So some thoughts and reflections. There are definitely potential opportunities and pluses to those policies, such as fostering a more innovative and self-sufficient economy and addressing long-term structural issues. But the risks are also significant. And I think the move away from traditional stimuli measures might unnecessarily slow down the path of recovery and exacerbate income inequality as I talk about. And there's also that uncertainty about how effective those supply side policies will be in the face of export control sanctions, geopolitical tensions, and whether this focus on security and self-sufficiency will attract or deter foreign investment. So I think, balancing those risks and potential opportunities will be crucial for China as it navigates its path forward. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. Fantastic deep dive into the tech side of the decision, which is obviously getting a lot of attention from Xi Jinping himself, but also a lot of attention all around the world. We've had a lot of really great questions come in, and we're going to get to a lot of those. But before we do, I just want to go around all 3 of you for your kind of quick sense of kind of one question that I had, which is that looking at the reaction that the third plenum has received from economists, both in China and in the West, in the United States, or especially kind of market observers and participants, has not been particularly positive. I mean, we've seen markets have decreased on the news. There's been a lot of skepticism about the promises that have made because of the kind of unfulfilled potential of the third plenum in 2013, which led many to expect more of liberalization and kind of various other reform steps that didn't end up being taken. And there's also, I think, a impression that is overall correct that this is a kind of a doubling down on Xi Jinping's kind of fundamental strategy for the economy, which at least in the last few years hasn't produced great results. There's obviously COVID thrown in there, which maybe is having quite a big effect on those outcomes. But anyway, the overall reaction has not been particularly positive from economists, markets, business, especially overseas. And I'm just curious as to do you think this criticism is fair? And I mean, whether you think it's the fair or not. I mean, judging on this plenum, but also the track record of Xi's policies and implementation, where do you think this plenum suggests that China's political economy will be in 5 years' time when it's set its kind of timeline for implementing these reforms? What's actually going to happen in your view? It's a lot, so feel free to kind of focus on a particular dimension of that. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is the so what, right? We have this big event, we have this long document, but what's actually going to happen in the 5-year timeline that kind of Xi's set for these reforms? So maybe Guoguang would start with you, then go to Bert and Lizzie, and just your kind of quick reactions to the spirit of that long-winded question, and then we'll get into the kind of detailed and specific questions we're getting from the audience.
Thank you, Neil. That's a really challenging question. I guess the Xi Jinping leadership will not really adjust their, fundamentally adjust their strategy and the policies in response to international opinion. So if they do something like that, they would actually have done that in the past number of years. But also we see some slight signals that they try to relax control of the economy. I mean, after actually the plenum. One, from a perspective of elite politics and power, we could see that Xi Jinping doesn't appear so frequently in Chinese official media. So he gives some other leaders more opportunity to talk about Chinese policies, to actually function as Chinese leaders. We don't know why actually he does in this way. Pretty unusual because that's not his way of doing things in the past several years. So yes, we know that there was rumor seeing his health conditions has declined very quickly, but we don't know. So what really happened? So I guess that also depends on, China's international connections. I have noted that there are really good questions regarding U.S.-China relations and also uncertain future of China, of U.S. General election. So if the White House is changed resident, so what would happen? So yeah, a lot of questions. Yes. So my questions are also more than answers.
Neil, you asked the impossible question, but let me give a bit of a try. First, fair enough. There's lots of criticism from the outside, but it's also to some extent a bit strange and a bit inconsistent. A lot of people have asked for a third plenum. Now there is a third plenum, so that's a good thing. There's lots of reforms in there. Xi Jinping has not given up on the notion of reform. There's still the decisive role of the market. So a number of things that you say, well, okay, that's sort of, we needed to hear that from Xi Jinping at today. Then on the industrial side, the science, technology, industrial policy side, there's a lot of nervousness, and I think that's where the main battleground is going to be. But at the same time, a lot of countries outside China now say, well, actually, we need to do more of industrial policy and science and technology policy. So it's in a way being China. In the end, the rule book is important. WTO, China has repeated, not in so many words, but the resolution said it wants to be a member of the CPTPP, which has implications for industrial policy, for state support, for state enterprises. So and that would be good if China were to tie itself by means of international agreements to not go overboard. Because one of the problems of the last 10 years is that there's been too much industrial policy in a way, and that each and every province and municipality copies the other one on the state's priorities. And that's why we have the overcapacity. That's why we have a lot of duplication of waste that is not very useful for Chinese people and brings a lot of antagonism abroad. On the implementation side, frankly, I think we're in a very different situation. 2013, Xi Jinping just came in. Li Keqiang was basically in charge of the third document, and she probably said, yeah, well, that's okay. So in other words, not fully bought in. When there was heavy weather in the course of the liberalization, especially of the financial markets, whether that was done right or not remains to be seen. Xi Jinping said, okay, well, that's not what I want. And there was backtracking afterwards, not just in financial, but in other areas as well, which was in a way a wasted opportunity. But that was because Xi Jinping got nervous. Now, Xi Jinping is fully upfront. He's there, he's bought in, it's right there. And yes, there's still the same interest group, there's still difficulties, but it's Xi Jinping in the lead, and he has the full political authority since then. So I think the chances of the implementation of the current document are much higher than the chances of implementation of the 2013 document when it was passed. Thanks.
Great. I just wanted to add a few more things to Guogong and Bert's excellent argument. I just wanted to mention the traumatizing experience of the 2015 stock market meltdown and how significant of an impact it has on Xi Jinping's economic thinking and policy direction. And, from what I hear, that experience, that crisis really, to Beijing's leadership, reviewed the vulnerabilities, not just about China's financial system. It also sort of underscored the risks associated with sort of market access, right? Rapid market liberalizations and speculative investments. And, as we know, during the 2015 crisis, the Chinese government actually intervened quite heavily and finally succeeded in stabilizing the market. And they resorted to measures like halting trading, banning short selling, directing state-owned enterprises to buy stocks, right? 国家对旧厂. So that's a really interventionist approach. And that actually highlighted to Xi Jinping the need for strong regulatory oversight to prevent that kind of market access and maintain financial stability. And as we know, in the aftermath of the 2015 stock market meltdown, Xi Jinping's administration implemented a series of regulatory reforms, all aimed at tightening control over the financial sector and tightening control over the market. So I think that's sort of a watershed moment, if you will. And it seems that after that, there's a shift in the leadership thinking toward security, stabilization, and sort of more real economy as opposed to virtual. So that's an experience I want to highlight. And speaking of this emphasis on self-sufficiency, I think the external factor definitely plays a role here, especially during the past few years. China realizes that, in spite of its progress in science and technology and research, there's still a gigantic gap between the frontier science and what Chinese can achieve at this point, especially in the face of US export controls and sanctions that really sort of turbocharged China's ambition to be more sufficient and to resort to security as the high priority sort of item on the agenda over economic development per se.
Thanks, Lizzie. Great answers and lots of food for thought in the coming years. Got a lot of questions about the hukou reforms that are proposed in the decision. So maybe this is a question for you, Bert. Basically, how substantial or radical are the hukou reforms that have been suggested in the resolution? What do you expect the outcomes are going to be? And how realistic is it that these are going to be fully implemented by local governments?
So I think they're significant. I think it's significant that they're being mentioned quite specifically in a Central Committee document. I think the land reforms, as I mentioned, the portability of land rights is a very important aspect of that. But in the end, it still has to be, it's never in the interest, or hardly ever in the interest of an individual municipality to give full service to a migrant if they can have the labor without the services, without paying for the services. So there is a line on that where the fiscal system is supposed to accommodate the additional cost. Again, you can debate about whether that's going to happen, but it's actually not that difficult to arrange. I mean, I know from other countries that do that. If a person moves from Mr. John from A to B, and his children move from A to B, then you can also make money for the healthcare and for the education system from A to B. Not very difficult to do. Hasn't been done in China. So, but it's now mentioned in the Central Committee. I believe also that there's more recognition, and not just from the document, but from the debate running up to the third plenum, of the importance of this mobility, because it's not just rural. Frankly, it's also quite difficult to move from Shanghai to Beijing and to get hukou in Beijing, and then you don't have the full services, and then you can't get a loan and you can't get an apartment. So it's wider than that. It's a clear impediment to labor mobility. If you want to be more productive, you need to be able to move labor where it is most productive. So it is a critical reform, quite a bit of meat in the document, and more, I believe, more forceful central pressure on municipalities to make it work.
Just a follow-up question, I guess. I mean, so the reforms that are proposed involve more access to urban public services by rural hukou holders, which is obviously a huge gap in the social safety net at the moment. Does this hukou reform require the reform of central local finances to happen first, and the kind of taxation reforms like local governments being able to keep more consumption tax revenues? When is this likely to happen? And is there a really difficult series of reforms to local debt and to combating the problems in the property sector that we're seeing right now? How are those kind of local fiscal reforms and property sector rescue packages kind of linked to this social welfare policies and the potential boost that could have for consumption as well, if people now.
You sound like a small town mayor that really doesn't want to have more migrants.
Well, this is what I thought it was all about.
We're going to make it so difficult, and therefore it cannot be done. No, it actually can be done, because if you look at the transfer system, first of all, the central government already pays for a lot of those services, especially to the poor areas. But education and healthcare, health insurance for non-covered people is already covered by the central government. So it's a matter of indeed moving that money from one place, where the origin of the migrant, to where the migrant is going to end up, to the destination. Second, if there is still a shortfall, you would need to give additional transfers to that municipality. And yes, central government can take a little bit of a deficit for that. Over time, all of these difficult reforms in the fiscal side would need to happen in any case for many different reasons, not just for accommodating the hukou system, but the fiscal side of things is really not a good excuse. The World Bank, together with the Development Research Center, when I was still there, we did a bit of a calculation on this, on well, what would it really cost on net, and taking into account that you move people from one place where they no longer demand services to another place. It's minimal. It is truly minimal. The big item is the pension system. And that's in a way a separate discussion. There's a centralization of the pension system ongoing already. It probably should be a fully centrally financed system in any case because of the mobility implications. But again, there's accommodations for that to be made. There's now a separate urban and rural resident system, so that's not the urban worker system. And people can at least have that as a pension system when they move to cities. So I really see not that many practical impediments. But I said local governments, they still like to have the labor at the burden. One big game changer, though, is actually the real estate market. One always should use a good crisis. Now, there's actually, if migrants come in and they actually buy an apartment, it is now a godsend for many municipalities. So that may actually tip the balance. Thanks.
That's super interesting. And I think, some nuance that's often been missing from the immediate reactions. The central government is well aware of many of the problems that it's facing. And we may not agree with everything they're doing to respond, but they're still trying to solve these problems. And China has surprised us before in how its economy's managed to muddle through a lot of thorny problems. So it's absolutely worth bearing those perspectives in mind. I just want to turn to you, Lizzie, with to answer some questions we've got about the international dimension of China's high-tech drive, which, as you said, is increasingly being seen by the leadership as a new source of growth, trying to replace some of the role that the property market used to play, and now that's trying to be cleaned up and is not nearly as healthy and growing as it once was. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about how is the environment for foreign investors changing in China's technology scene? Does Xi Jinping and the top leadership still see a role for kind of foreign VC, private equity, or is this emerging strategic competition between the US and China, either under a Trump or a Harris administration, going to kind of shut that off? And what impact would that have on China as well?
Right. Well, thank you, Neil. And it's a terrifically important and fascinating question. I just wanted to mention sort of several dimensions of policy initiatives or pilot programs I've seen pointing to more collaboration, more openness toward international investors. China is actually launching a series of global partnerships with international research institutions and universities to enhance its own R&D capabilities, right? So it's not attracting global institutions for that purpose per se, but this, as perceived by China, will help in the exchange of knowledge and development of cutting-edge technologies, which will be beneficial to China. And China has initiated a lot of talent programs to support its R&D goals, attracting not just Chinese scientists from universities abroad, but also retain top scientific talents directly from international institutions. That includes incentives for Chinese researchers to work abroad and to return and to contribute to domestic research efforts. And in terms of policy support, what we notice is that Chinese government has been enacting a new regulatory framework, including lots of supportive policies to foster innovation research, especially in energy systems, right? That includes subsidies, tax incentives, and favorable regulations for foreign investment to come in and support Chinese research and basically Chinese innovations. And China has been improving the framework of legally protecting intellectual property rights to encourage innovation and to ensure that researchers and companies can actually benefit from their invention. That's also a focus. So we see, on one hand, we seem to have this idea that China is becoming more inward-looking, more self-sustained, more focused on the domestic market and domestic sort of innovation ecosystem. But paradoxically, or maybe not, it's also becoming more open to ideas. There's the thirst for international funding and also international expertise. Previously, when it comes to China's strategy to attract international investment, the term we hear is 用市场换技术, so exchange our vast market for your advanced technology. Now the term we hear more often is 用技术换市场. So we have certain advanced manufacturing prowess, and we welcome you to leverage our technology to develop market for us to expand Chinese companies' global footprint. So that's also a shift in thinking that I think is worth pointing out. But of course, there are a whole range of mixed signals. We saw foreign executives, foreign companies, especially when it comes to sensitive technologies and things that the Chinese security apparatus perceives as potentially dangerous. There are, random crackdowns on foreign firms, especially when it comes to consulting and legal services. So that's also a red flag, I think, we should be aware of. So again, when it comes to China, things are complicated. There are multiple dimensions to the same issue, and I think we need to sort of take into account all those perspectives when we're analyzing China.
Great, thanks, Lizzie. Last questions for you, Guoguang. We have a few on kind of the political dimensions of the decision and the significant economic challenges that Xi still faces, particularly when it comes to implementation and getting the system to follow him. So I have condensed a lot of questions into kind of 3 quick-fire questions for you, given we only have a few minutes left. So firstly, what are your thoughts on the practical implications of the national security sections of the plenum decision? Secondly, do you think the plenum decision suggests anything about reforms to the PLA amidst the ongoing corruption purges? And finally, is this third plenum an indication that Xi Jinping is going to seek a 4th term at the Party Congress in 2027?
Thank you for all the questions. Regarding security section, I guess his major task is still to tightly control the state security system. So because that part is really dark in our observation of Chinese politics. So we know very little about that. But from, appearance, you can see Xi Jinping, appoint his, cronies to those, ministry like public security, national security. So, so basically, I think when Xi Jinping emphasized security, so it's basically about his power and also the regime control of China, and also in some extending way defining China's national security security defined by actually the regime. Regarding the military, I would say there would be no major organizational change within the military, because Xi Jinping already did that fundamental restructuring of the Chinese military. Yes, recently he had new change, so abolishing strategic supporting army to reorganize that into something regarding information warfare. I guess this is already pretty major step he has taken already. So in the next few years, I don't foresee such major, restructuring measures. So I guess his major task within the military, just like within the security sector, so try to control the military and also try to improve the warfare ability of the military and preparing for the future military conflict, perhaps with Taiwan, even at a larger scale. And also, that's really interesting question. So, is Xi Jinping preparing for his fourth term? My answer is definitely yes. But can we see any signal from this plenum? It's a very tiny signal. As actually, for the first time, maybe, my memory is bad anyway. So they mentioned that, okay, the policy measures, the plans of reform proposed by this plenum would be completed by year 2029. So within 5 years. So why 2029? So why they need to see that? And usually they can just, don't specify this kind of, when they can complete it. So basically before 2039, there would be 2037, 2027, I'm sorry, 2029, 2027, and 2027, we will see his fourth term. So that's really tiny signal, but I guess usually these kind of formal meetings don't do a lot in real power distribution. So Xi Jinping's real plan for the fourth term, we will see that maybe for the later, stage, not right now, but still we can see something.
欢迎来到6度解析新闻背后的多维思考，带你洞悉头条背后的世界。在今日华尔街频道的6度解析中，我们将深入探究时事热点，为你揭开新闻背后的真相。在这个信息泛滥、真相难觅的时代，6度解析应运而生。我运用海量数据、人工智能整合以及专家观点，层层剥析每个故事。通过实时背景数据挖掘，确保你获得全面的新闻资讯。然而，我们关注的不仅仅是数据，更重要的是将它们串联起来。我将分析多方视角，揭示隐藏的脉络，为你提供单一媒体常常忽略的背景信息。无论是政治、经济，还是全球事务，我都将为你带来最具洞察力的分析。试想一下，拥有洞悉全局的能力，做出明智的决策，参与有意义的讨论，这就是6度解析带给你的价值。它不仅仅是新闻分析，更是一种赋能的工具。加入今日华尔街的6度解析，共同探索头条背后的故事。你通往深度理解的旅程，从这里开始。不要只是阅读新闻，要解码新闻，理解新闻，活出新闻。这一切尽在6度解析。立即订阅，不错过任何真知灼见，因为了解真相仅仅是个开始。
大家好，欢迎来到我们的6度解析节目。今天我们将探讨一个极具挑战性的话题：中国大陆的研究机构建议北京设立影子政府，以准备统治台湾。这个提议来自厦门大学两岸城市规划研究所，尽管文章已经被删除，但内容却透露了北京对统一后立即接管台湾的计划。文章详细描述了权力过渡计划，并指出国际环境的变化可能会加速这一进程。设立中央台湾工作委员会作为影子政府，研究适用法律和基础设施整合等问题，这一建议引发了学者的怀疑，认为其不切实际。文章还建议设立台湾治理试点区，从香港的经验中汲取教训，为台湾规划新制度。然而，北京的一国两制模式在台湾的说服力已经大大减弱，台湾的3大主要政党都拒绝了这一计划。请大家继续收看详细内容。各位观众朋友，欢迎收看本期特别节目。今天我们将深入探讨一则引起广泛关注的新闻。这则新闻最初来自于南华早报，它披露了一家中国大陆研究机构的一项建议，这一建议涉及到极其敏感的两岸关系问题。该研究机构建议北京设立一个影子政府， 以便在统一后能够立即接管台湾的治理。这项建议来自厦门大学两岸城市规划研究所。研究所最近在社交媒体微信上发布了一篇文章，详细阐述了这一设想。然而，这篇文章很快被删除。文章中指出，由于复杂的国际环境，包括唐纳德·特朗普可能在11月再次当选美国总统，这可能会加速北京的统一时间表。尽管文章未进一步详细说明，但这种罕见的公开讨论展示了中国大陆内部对台湾未来的思考。北京一直视台湾为其领土的一部分，并表示如果有必要，将以武力将其纳入控制。虽然大多数国家不承认台湾为独立国家，但也反对任何企图夺取该岛的行动。厦门大学两岸城市规划研究所隶属于该校的建筑与土木工程学院，他们确认了文章的作者身份，并表示将重新发布这篇文章，但拒绝了媒体的采访请求。两位专注于台湾问题的大陆学者对这一建议表达了怀疑，认为其不切实际。文章中建议设立一个中央台湾工作委员会，作为影子政府，随时准备接管台湾的行政管理。委员会的职责包括研究适用法律、货币兑换和两岸基础设施整合等问题。研究所还提议团结岛内反独力量，鼓励台湾人参与接管计划的讨论。文章指出，随着大陆军事实力的增强，统一本身的难度在减少，而统一后的有效控制将变得越来越重要。自从民进党的赖清德于5月接任台湾领导人以来，北京和台北之间的关系一直紧张。北京数十年来一直提议以一国两制模式治理台湾，但从未发布过详细计划。中国国家主席习近平在2019年呼吁对台湾实行两制解决方案，表示北京将考虑台湾的现实情况以及双方的意见和建议。北京在2022年的一份白皮书中进一步阐述了这一点，称台湾在统一后将作为特别行政区享有高度自治，其社会制度和生活方式将受到尊重。白皮书并未提及台湾的政治制度是否会发生成变化，台北已经拒绝了这一提议。厦门研究所在文章中还建议在大陆设立台湾治理试点区，并从香港的经验中汲取教训，为台湾规划新制度。文章指出，最近香港的动荡表明，完全接受现有制度的一国两制方法不一定适合台湾。文章认为，台湾应该从一开始就完全融入大陆。研究所建议在福建的厦门和泉州等沿海城市设立试点区，这些城市与台湾隔海相望，语言和文化相似。研究所表示，这些试点区可以用来模拟统一后的治理模式，包括选举、语言和教育，以测试政策并培训将来管理台湾的干部。文章指出，香港作为一国两制模式的说服力在台湾已经大大减弱，需要一个新的模式。尽管北京坚称一国两制框架在香港是成功的，但台湾的3大主要政党都拒绝了这一计划，理由是其在香港的失败。首先，从大陆的角度来看，这一建议显然是出于对两岸统一的迫切需求，以及对未来可能的权力过渡的准备。厦门大学两岸城市规划研究所建议设立影子政府，其意图十分明确，即在统一后能迅速接管台湾的治理。这一建议显示了大陆方面对两岸关系的长期规划和精心准备。然而，从台湾的角度来看，这种提议无疑是高度敏感的。台湾当局以及广大民众对大陆的一国两制模式一直持强烈反对态度，尤其是香港局势的发展，让人们更加质疑这一模式的可行性。民进党政府一直强调台湾的主权和独立，因此对于大陆提出的任何统一方案，台北方面都极其谨慎，甚至是反对的。此外，从国际社会的角度来看，这一提议也将面临诸多挑战。国际社会普遍支持维护台湾现状，反对任何单方面改变现状的行动。尤其是美国，作为台湾的重要支持者，特朗普政府的任何举动都可能对两岸关系产生深远影响。如果特朗普再次当选总统，那么他的对华政策将对两岸关系产生何种影响，仍然难以预测，但可以预见的是，这将增加局势的不确定性。这篇文章所提到的设立台湾治理试点区的建议，也充满了争议性。试点区的设立表面上是为未来的统一做准备，但实际上也可能被视为一种对台湾施加压力的手段。这种做法可能会加剧两岸的紧张关系， 并进一步引发台湾民众的反感。尽管厦门大学两岸城市规划研究所的这一建议具体实施的可能性存疑，但其背后反映出的两岸关系现状以及未来走向仍然值得我们认真关注。这一提议的出现，也许只是大陆内部某些学术机构的观点，但它却揭示了北京在面对两岸关系问题时的某种思考方式和策略准备。总的来说，这篇文章提供了一个观察两岸关系以及大陆对台政策的窗口。无论这一建议最终是否会得到实施，它都提醒我们，随着国际局势的变化和两岸关系的演变，未来的两岸关系将继续充满复杂性和挑战。我们需要继续关注这一问题的发展，并从多角度进行深入分析，以便更好地理解和应对未来可能出现的各种局面。感谢您的收看，请大家继续关注本节目的深入探索。欢迎大家进入六度探索的辩论环节，我们从正反两个角度对本节目进行辩论，请出我们的辩论高手楚天舒、谢琪琪。
我是楚天舒。
我是谢琪琪。
哎呀，设立影子政府来准备统治台湾，真是有远见啊！这就像准备好一套西装，随时等着参加晚宴。北京早就该这么做了，一来可以显示决心，二来也能在统一后迅速接管，避免混乱。你看，像美国当年在伊拉克统一后，不就是因为没有准备好，结果一塌糊涂吗？
楚天舒，你这想法可真够天马行空的。设立影子政府，这不就像是小孩子在玩过家家吗？你真觉得台湾会乖乖让你接管？香港的一国两制都搞得一团乱，你还想拿台湾来试试？这不是自己打自己的脸吗？
琪琪，你这话说的容易。香港是香港，台湾是台湾，两者不能一概而论。你看，研究所还建议设立试点区呢，先模拟一下，这比直接上手好得多吧。再说了，统一是必然的历史趋势，就像当年德国东西统一一样，准备的再充分也不为过嘛。
楚天舒，你这逻辑真是让人哭笑不得。德国统一是因为东德民众期盼自由，而不是因为西德设立了什么影子政府。你这倒像是看了太多间谍片，把统一搞得像是搞间谍工作似的。就算模拟了又如何？台湾民众根本不买账啊！要是这么简单，早就统一了。
琪琪，你太低估政治智慧了。模拟就是为了避免重蹈覆辙，让统一进程更加顺利。拿间谍片来说事，这完全是滑稽。再说了，台湾的内部矛盾和民心向背，这些都是可以通过这种方式来逐步调整的。就像古代诸葛亮六出祁山，准备充分才能在战略上取胜啊。
楚天舒，你要是诸葛亮，那我可真想献献你的隆中对了。你这套理论听起来像是纸上谈兵，实际操作困难重重。更何况，台湾已经习惯了自己的生活方式和政治制度，不是你想换就能换的。就算是穿上了西装，也未必能和台湾这个晚宴融为一体。